What we're looking at here is 3 different kits that when used together in different combinations make this soldered up example. So we'll take a look at all 3 of them. First, let's take a look at the sequencer itself. This is what drives the blinking rates of the LEDs that go into these 2 products in particular, but this can also be used on its own, all by itself, for completely different applications, such as blinking computer lights and other things you might find on any given model. The instructions themselves are straightforward and relatively simple. This does not look like too difficult a project even for someone such as myself who doesn't really have a lot of experience with more complicated electronics such as this board presents. You need a 1/32 drill or smaller to do all the pinholes that go into the board here. And then it's just a matter of lining everything up with the picture and soldering everything into place. A 9-volt battery clip is included, but it runs on 6 to 12 volts, or rather it's been tested at 6 to 12 volts. And all the directions here really seem to spell it out relatively simply. Now, one application for this sequencer is on something such as this. Now this is just basically a panel board to hold all of these LEDs. Again, there's a lot of drilling going on, and when I first opened this up, I was terrified of the thing. Looking at this example that Elliot sent also terrified me. That's a lot of fine point soldering. However, he's got a video on the Fedoratron website of him soldering this, and it couldn't be simpler. I'm looking forward to trying this out. Or, if you have the older and smaller version from Polar Lights of this kit, you can also use the sequencer to drive this version of the engine effect. Again, all the LEDs are included with a lot of ribbon cable and the board itself. So we got package 1, package 2, and package 3. Package 3 can be used all by itself to drive any LEDs anywhere, or it can be linked up with either of these. I should note that the plastic bag that this 12-inch version came in did say experimental on it. However, I'm sure if you get in touch with Elliot directly at Fedoratron.com, he'll be able to tell you what's up. Now there are 2 distinct features on this board that I really like. 1, you can change the speed of the blinking. 2, you can actually change the brightness as well. And that's unique so far. So I'm going to go get a 9-volt battery. Let's take a look at this lit up. I want to make sure I made this part clear. There are 3 different products here. You can buy the sequencer by itself. You can buy the sequencer with the engine board for the 18-inch or the 12-inch version of the Jupiter 2 model kit. So if you buy this board, you get the sequencer. You don't need to buy this board with its sequencer and another sequencer unless you really need another sequencer. And here is the Fedoratron sequencer in action. There are 2 different features on this board. One is controlling the speed. This is common to all the boards. However, the second one, which I'll show you first, is you can control the brightness. Why would you want to do that? Well, one common trend seems to be putting the brightest possible LEDs into a model that you can. Personally, I think it takes away from the realism of the situation. For a light source to give off a certain amount of light at a certain size and to scale that down, you got to scale the light output down as well. So generally speaking, when you see the outside of the ship, the lights coming from the engine do not reflect off the hull. The brighter these LEDs are, the more they're going to reflect off the hull. So, in my case, I really like the idea that you can turn the brightness down on these and get them to a level you like. Another obvious difference on this board, these LEDs are warm white, not cool white. If you go and look at the other reviews of the engine sequencers, you'll see that they all have a bluish tint. That's because they're cool white LEDs. These are warm and more natural on the eye, more in the orange range of the color spectrum than the blue. Now the real tricky thing on this board that I've spoken with Elliot about is the speed controller. So at one end of the spectrum you can get really nice slow speed, and you'll note that there are 4 LEDs on at a given time. Different sequencer boards have different amounts, and I suspect that you could, when you wire this up, cross-wire several so you could have 3 or 4 LEDs going on, like some of the other boards. That's the way it seems to be in the series. Now going from this dead slow speed, now the speed controller is really delicate. I'll show you that in the light. So there's a lot of turn just to get this much of a speed change going on. So that right there felt like 1 through 5 out of a possible 10. And then at 6, you're straight up to this. The potentiometer here seems to be non-linear. There's a lot of spin. There's a lot of turning to get this much speed change, and then all of a sudden you're into full speed. Alright, and then the speed that I think I like is right in there. Can't quite get the control. So the speed I'm trying to get is so close to the current one here that by simply turning the knob or turning the screw inset just a little, it wants to default. There. I think that's it. Ooh, it's close. So there it looks like there's 2 on at a time. That's pretty good speed. Let's see what this looks like inside the model. So this looks pretty good when it was sitting outside of the body. Seeing it in, it looks like there's probably 3 or 4 lights on at a time. But I could probably slow that down a little more. I think I had a setting where there were 2 on at a time. That might be the speed to go at. Persistence of vision may compensate. This looks really nice though. The warm white LEDs are fantastic. This looks much more natural in the way it was true to the show. You might be able to see there's a good amount of light going off on the wall, and it may not be obvious on the camera unless I can brighten this footage up that there's much of a glow going on the underside of the body. But in person there's definitely a good amount, so I'm going to take that brightness down a little to see how best it looks in person light rather than in camera. To see how it looks in person rather than camera. So there's full bright. There's full dim. And I think I really like it down in the dim end. 0 to 20% range. Let's see. Full. So there's half. That's dimmest. I definitely like that. So on camera there appear to be groups of 3 or 4 LEDs going off in banks. In person the effect is pretty similar. There's a little glow from light to light, but that's a persistence of vision thing. So let's change the speed here. I'm using a miniature screwdriver to change the speed controller. Alright, so there's full slow. And you'll probably note that the LEDs aren't positioned exactly in place, but they do line up. So it's easy to get to infinite fast. So on camera that just looks like it's on, but there is a flickering in person. So if you got some patience, so there's 2 on. That almost looks like 3. Yeah, I think somewhere in there between this speed and that previous one, if I can ever get that back. There. I'm barely applying pressure to the screwdriver to get this to turn. Yeah, so I think once you get a speed you like, you definitely set it and forget it. So I definitely like it at its dimmest. The color is beautiful. The controls, while finicky, if this is version 1 of a board, that would be very easy enough to get some different potentiometers in there, possibly take them off board. And while I'm talking about that, let's take a look at this under full light. So even under a full cloudy morning light, the dimmest setting is still pretty bright. Might try and slow it down just a little more.